Full house, huh? Okay. So how many of you are currently looking for a new UI framework? Okay, good. How many of you are familiar with accessibility? Good, okay. How many of you actually use assistive technology throughout your day? Okay, good, perfect. These are actually mine right here. I can't see without these. So anyone wearing glasses, you're using assistive technology too, although very low tech. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Gerard Cohen. I am the front-end UX architect and a senior accessibility lead at Wells Fargo. Sure. My contact information is up on the screen there. I want to thank you for coming up to the dark dungeons of the third floor up in the corner to sit with me today. I know you could have picked any other track to sit in, so I'm very thankful that you're here. So we're going to talk a lot about UI frameworks. Everyone has their own criteria for picking a UI framework. It's a very big decision, you know. It's not something normally you take lightly. It's something you're going to be married to for a good amount of time, so you want to take your time trying to figure it out. Everyone has their own set of criteria for picking a UI framework, whether it's ease of use, you know, community, popularity, any other, you know, number of criteria to pick. But for how many of you is accessibility like one of those criteria? Okay, I guess that's why you're here, right? Good. So how do you know which one's accessible, right? Hopefully today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about just some very basic checks. This is not meant to be an exhaustive accessibility audit of these frameworks. Hopefully you'll leave here today with some, you know, simple, easy things that you can do to have a really big impact on your projects. So these are the frameworks we'll be talking about today. I know the schedule had listed something different. That was, you know, the landscape changes so fast that I decided to do something a little more relevant. And this is my OCD alphabetical list. So we'll be talking about Bootstrap, Foundation, which is a really good responsive framework. We have Ionic for a mobile flavor. And we'll talk a little bit about Material Design Lite. I'm not here to bash these frameworks at all. I understand it's hard to build a framework, especially something that's going to be used by a lot of people. And I'm greatly appreciative of these frameworks for putting in the hard works to make our jobs easier. So I'm not here to bash them. I'm just here to help you guys maneuver your way around when you're picking these. Hopefully some of you have experience with these. Hopefully some of you are interested in using these, and I'll give you some more insight on how to make them fully accessible. Some of the things that we'll be looking at today are forms, tabs, basically your basic tab widget. We'll be talking about dialogues and tooltips. We want to take a look at some actual code that comes from the documentation of these frameworks. We want to see, do they have any documentation for accessibility? What are their intentions for accessibility? Do their examples exhibit good accessible you know, habits and best practices? Some of the criteria that we'll be looking at are proper labels and descriptions. This is very important, especially when we're talking about forms, but just for anything in general. We talk a lot about semantics. It's not just something that like old cranky developers argue about. Semantics have a really big part in accessibility because the semantic, when you define something what it is, you're also implying what the interaction for that thing is as well. So semantics are very important. We'll talk about keyboard navigation. Can users that don't use a mouse, are they able to navigate through your website and you know, go through flows and tasks? This is actually really important because there are people that don't use keyboards. They have motor disabilities and they have to rely on very basic like methods of navigating. So things like mouth sticks, where it's really just a stick in their mouth that they use to like tap and poke at the screen. Also head wands that do the same thing, so they're navigating with their head. And maybe something as basic as just a switch, so these are just binary controls. There are people that their only ability to navigate is through a machine called a sip and puff. So literally inhaling is one action and exhaling is another. Some motor disabilities include muscular dystrophy, Parkinson's, or even just plain arthritis, which I'm pretty sure in 20 years from now I'm going to have from being on a keyboard most of my life. So it's not just about motor disabilities as well. There's also power users involved. You think about us as developers, we live in the command line, so we type a lot more than we use the mouse. So again, there's a power user, not necessarily motor disabilities, but they feel more comfortable navigating their day-to-day tasks with the keyboard. We'll also be talking, along with that is a focus indication as well. We'll be talking about color contrast, which is actually something that usually your designer should handle for you, but it's something you need to be aware of. Color contrast actually assists colorblind or people with low vision. So again, like myself with glasses, I'm considered a low vision user if I'm not wearing them. And color contrast is actually, it's for colorblind people, it's actually, colorblind, they don't see in black and white. It's really a color deficiency. So they can't see certain colors to the full spectrum that they should be able to. And actually 10% of men are colorblind or have some kind of color deficiency. So there's probably some people, some men in here that have some level of color deficiency. Women, there's only 0.5% of women are colorblind, and unfortunately the chromosome just goes along with the men. So we're in most cases of the color deficiency, and 99% of people that are colorblind or have a color deficiency have a deficiency in the red-green area. And this is something that's really important. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but this plays a really big part on our UI, red and green. Lastly, for complex widgets, we'll be talking about ARIA, and we'll be using the why ARIA 1.0 authoring practices as our guide when we're talking about these widgets and patterns. Now, it's important to note that these are not, this is not the rule of how you should do it. They're just guidelines. So you can start with these as a basis to get along the way, and then depending on your particular use case, you may have to modify it to make it usable for your users. In this particular aspect, there's some dispute on whether it's too complicated, widgets are too complicated, because they include not only roles and states and properties, but also very specific keyboard interactions. Again, earlier I talked about semantics and how they imply keyboard interaction, or just in general interaction rules. A lot of people feel that it may be too complicated just for a normal user. But maybe I don't have any kind of disabilities, but I'm not exactly familiar with how these interactions should work. So my recommendation, if you're struggling with this kind of dichotomy of which way to go, is if you're just doing a plain website, just kind of for the most part static, you're okay with just using good semantic markup. You probably don't need ARIA too much. If you're doing a web application, then you're probably going to need ARIA. ARIA and the roles and the properties and the keyboard interactions are meant to bring up a parity with what a user's experience is with their operating system. So the way they interact with their operating system interface, you're expected to be able to provide that same interface for web widgets and components. ARIA, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about ARIA. So first I want to talk about forms. This is really, really big, especially for working in the banking industry. Basically every page has some level of form. They're so ubiquitous. They're really easy to get right, but they're really easy to get wrong too. And we're going to talk about some basic things that you can do to improve the accessibility of your forms, and we'll look at some examples. It's really just about, just again, good markup. Very basic. Now when we're talking about semantics, and we're talking about proper labels and grouping. This is something that's actually really important for screen reader users, to make sure that your input, your elements are properly labeled. And to understand why, I know a lot of people, especially when we're doing like interviews, we ask them, so why is it important for this to programmatically associate a label with the input element? The number one answer I always get is, it's good for accessibility, because if you click on the label, then the input element gets focused, which is true. That's that's a very good thing to provide to your users, but that's actually not really the reason why we do it. So just to explain the way screen reader users interact with the page, think about when you get to a web page that you're not familiar with, the first thing you do is you're going to scan all over the place. Very rarely do we read from left to right, top to bottom. You're going to look at particular headings that pop out at you. You're probably going to skip over the ads. You're going to look for any kind of content that's relevant to you. Screen reader users actually navigate the page in the same way. And the way they do that is the screen readers will provide them special keyboard shortcuts. So for example, JAWS, pressing the B key will essentially start reading out each button on the page in order. Or they can do something like insert B to get a list of all the buttons on a page, and they can navigate to a particular one they're interested in. And just about every element on the page will have some kind of keyboard shortcut. And the screen reader does this by, they literally hijack or intercept keyboard strokes for the user. Now, when we're talking about forms, we're using our keyboard in a completely different context, right? Now we're actually typing, inputting information. So now B no longer means button, it's actually the character B, right? H is no longer header, it's actually the letter H. Down arrow, which for screen reader users means read line by line, down, or up arrow, read the previous line. Now it's actually selecting, radio buttons in a group or a native select or something like that. So now it's no longer able to provide those keyboard shortcuts that are used to navigate and read the items on the page. So if the input elements are not associated with the label, then they have no idea what that input is for, right? Because there's no way for them to get to that information. So this is the secret to why getting forms right is so important. The screen reader users will be completely lost if the labels aren't properly associated. Of course, along with keyboard usage and focus indication, we'll talk about color contrast. You'll see this pattern as we go through all these widgets. It's the same thing that we'll be going through for the most part. For forms, we'll talk about error validation. Most of the frameworks that we're going to go over today don't provide actual validation mechanism. They may provide some styles to describe error states, but they don't actually provide the mechanisms to do the validation. So that's something that's usually custom, and we'll have to do a certain level of ARIA for that. Next, we'll talk about tabs. So tab, I'm sure you all are familiar. This is basically a tabbed interface that allows dynamic switching of content. Again, something very, very heavily used on the internet. Of course, so our checklist is a keyboard interaction. There's a very definite keyboard interaction pattern that's used for tabs. We have a focus indication, color contrast, and some ARIA roles. Our keyboard interaction rules is tab would actually focus the active tab. We should be able to use the left and up arrows to navigate, and arrows should cycle. And roles that we're expecting are tab panel, tab list, tab states of ARIA selected and ARIA controls. Dialogs. This is actually a favorite topic of mine, but we're all familiar with dialogs. They're essentially, overlays that prompt for a response or some type of, additional information from a user. Again, our criteria: keyboard interaction, focus indication, color contrast, and ARIA. There's very specific rules for a dialog, so tab should basically be limited to the dialog itself, shift and shift tab, so it should cycle. Escape key should close the panel as well, and enter, if there's a form, should submit the form. Roles that are necessary are dialog and alert dialog. So a lot of people are confused by these. Alert dialog is actually basically a replacement for your JavaScript alert. So it's a very quick message with like an OK, some kind of confirmation. Dialog is for bigger pieces of information, or it actually contains other controls and widgets or a form. Last widget we'll look at are tooltips, and these are these are meant to replace the title attribute, which is, I'm not sure if you're aware, is horribly inaccessible. Title attribute that we use on just about anything is only available to sighted users that use a mouse, meaning it only displays on hover. Screen reader users don't usually get that information. Keyboard users don't get that information, so title attribute, the little tooltip that comes up, does not appear on focus. Excuse me?
Would it ever be used as alternative text
for the button?
Yeah, like you put a title attribute on something.
So there's actually better ways to do it. Again, most users won't get that title attribute. So you can either use some visually hidden text, which we'll talk about, or you can use an ARIA label.
That's just assumed.
Title, just don't use it. There's very few cases where title works, but it's so few that it's just the rule is just don't even bother. All right, I think we're going to get to the good parts now. Actually, we start fixing these things. So solutions for some of these, we're going to go back again and we're going to quickly fix these. Again, the goal is to do some very quick, simple things that will greatly impact accessibility. So for forms, we're going to jump back into we're going to jump back into our Ionic example. We're going to make sure that we explicitly associate labels with the inputs. We're going to group related fields with field set, which is really important. And we're going to make sure we convey any kind of error state and description. So let's go ahead and take a look at this button. Now the accessible content is it's actually going to read out menu, right? And all we did there was we added text label. This is very funny. We added a span with a class of hidden visually, and I'll share that code with you in a second. But we just added some text there, and we hid it from visual users, but made it available to screen reader users. So now a screen reader user will know what that button is for.
Attendee info check and source.
Wow.
http://codecon.io/ionic/pen/qwam/ew source https://dog.
I don't even know where that's coming from. No. Wow, what a day, huh? Let's go into these form elements. By the way, this code is going to be available to get on GitHub. I'm trying to speed through this. This was a lot of information to fit into 40 minutes. So here we'll notice something very interesting is now we have first name is properly described. Again, we use the same technique. We added the text with the hidden visually. And now we have some proper roles, ARIA invalid, ARIA required, and tab index. So the secret to that was because Ionic is based on Angular, they actually have a module specifically for accessibility, and it's called ng-aria. All I had to do was add that module to my requires, and those properties automatically got added. So they've done a really good job for fixing that particular problem. The other thing is I'm actually using a field set with a legend to describe the grouping of these field elements there. So for keyboarding, wow. Okay. So you've noticed here now I have a proper focus indication. And error indication, I've given a nice border. So there's two things about error validation when you're trying to describe it to visual users is color is not enough, right? Because again, there's color blind or color deficiency. And if you remember, the 99% of people are color deficient in red and green. And those are the two colors that we use to describe error or, good state, right? So it's very important that you don't rely on just those colors. All right, so the visually hidden content that I was talking about, Bootstrap and Foundation actually provide classes already for you. For Bootstrap, it's SR-only, and for Foundation, it's show for SR. In any case, this is the CSS that I use. This is standard for hiding content visually. Pretty much everyone that needs to do this will use these exact properties. So we'll talk about tabs. Let's go back to our tab solution. We're just going to implement our keyboard. That was the only thing that was missing. And actually, this is really, really easy to do. You just use the PayPal Bootstrap accessibility plugin. So PayPal has taken the time to make their Bootstrap widgets accessible. It's an additional dependency that you do have to add, but they did a pretty good job, especially with the tabs. So we'll take a look at that. Again, all I did was I took the same example. I just added the accessibility plugin. And now keyboard interaction works the way it's supposed to. They cycle, I'm using arrow keys to navigate, and I don't have to hit enter to activate the actual tab. Now the only weird thing is now the actual focus indication is actually worse now, so you'll still have to fix that. But that's the easiest way to get Bootstrap accessible.
So that was done just including the...
Excuse me?
That was done just including the plugin, that's it?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Dialogs. So dialogs, our foundation dialog actually takes a lot of work. I'm just going to show you how it works with the fixes, and then you guys can look at the code later on. We're running out of time, and I want you guys to get to lunch. So first thing you'll notice is the close button is focused immediately. So one of the rules is that the first focusable item in the dialog needs to be focused. I actually changed the markup to a button, and that's why it looks bigger. I didn't bother with the styling for it, but I changed it to a button and added some essential classes. Another important thing that I had to do here is add this extra text here, which is a closed dialog, because a screen reader will actually be reading the X. It would say multiplication when a screen reader navigates to that. So in order to make it make sense, I had to add ARIA hidden to the X so that it's not visible to screen readers, and then add this visually hidden text so that when it's focused by a screen reader, it'll actually say closed dialog. And so you'll see now that tabs and shift tab properly cycle there. And hitting escape closes, and the trigger that popped up, the dialog, is now focused. And that was actually quite a bit of work to get that taken care of, and that code's available in GitHub, which I'll give you the link at the end. Lastly, tooltips. What we need to do is we need to take care of make sure that the proper roles are used, and we need to make sure the keyboard works. Now, if you're looking at any kind of examples for tooltips, usually they'll recommend to use ARIA described by. I chose to use ARIA labeled by because Chromevox actually doesn't read it. It doesn't support, well, there's a bug right now that doesn't properly read ARIA described by. Safari and VoiceOver actually will wait 7 seconds before it reads the additional content, which basically means to a user it's never read, because no one's going to know that they have to wait 7 seconds, nor if they did, would they actually wait 7 seconds to get that additional content. All right, so we're getting to the end. I know accessibility, it's kind of crazy, but I actually got a chance to speak to some of these frameworks and ask them what their goals were for supporting accessibility. I was able to speak to Marcy Sutton, who's very pivotal in making Angular, which Ionic is based on, accessible. What she told me was that the ng ARIA module will actually be included as part of version 2.0. It will no longer be, an extra dependency. It'll automatically be included. As well, the material design patterns and widgets will be fully accessible. She has said that they've committed to not release anything unless it's fully accessible. Foundation, I spoke to the guys at Foundation, really good guys. They know they have a lot of work to do, but they've said the next version, which I believe is version 6, is being rewritten specifically for accessibility. And as well, they're not going to release anything unless it's accessible. Bootstrap is a little bit more difficult because they don't have such a, they basically only rely on volunteers to make their widgets accessible. Although Patrick over there did tell me that version 4, which is the next version, is being refactored with accessibility in mind. And same thing, they're not going to be releasing anything unless there's, they're fully accessible. So conclusion for today, basically, there's no silver bullet. You're going to need to fill in the gaps. A framework can't do everything for you, but they should be able to give you the tools to do what you need to do for your particular users. One thing that I would highly recommend is be careful when you start to nest widgets, because keyboard interactions may conflict. So for example, if I had a tooltip which requires escape to hide, but I have that inside of a dialog which also hides escape on escape, you want to make sure that if I hit escape to hide the tooltip, I'm not also hiding my panel. And all the frameworks that I talked to said they're very much so open to contributions. So if you guys actually fix anything, they would love to have it. Just be a good citizen and help everyone else out for it. And that's basically it. Thank you for sticking around. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm here if you guys have any questions. And actually, I'll tweet out the GitHub, but it's basically github.com/Gerard K. Cohen. I'll tweet that out in a little bit if anyone wants to get the actual code. But I'm here for questions if you need.